There is something almost no one notices when they check the time on their phone. The gesture takes less than a second. The screen lights up, the digits appear, and the information is just there, precise, synchronized with millions of other devices around the world. There is no appreciable margin of error. There is no ambiguity. It is 3:15 or 8:22, and that is a fact shared by an entire civilization all at once. But that certainty has a long and complicated history. For most of human existence, nobody knew the exact time. And for centuries, nobody needed to. The earliest ways of measuring time did not actually measure time. They measured the movement of the sun. A stick driven into the ground casts a shadow. When the shadow is at its shortest, it is noon. When it stretches toward the east, the afternoon is moving forward. Sundials were enough for thousands of years because time was local, physical, and intuitive. Every village had its own noon, determined by its own position beneath the sun. Two towns separated by 100 kilometers to the east and west did not share the same hour. And that was not a problem, because no one had reason to coordinate with any precision. Markets, harvests, prayers, everything was organized around the visible movement of the sky. Mechanical clocks arrived in Europe around the 13th century, installed in church towers and public buildings. They were not born for precision. They were born for sound. What mattered was not the accuracy of the mechanism, but the bell that announced the liturgical hours. If a clock ran a few minutes fast or slow, nothing that mattered was affected. Daily life operated with wide margins. A craftsman opened his workshop when there was light. A farmer returned home when the sun went down. Time was a general direction, not a precise coordinate. Over the following centuries, clocks improved. The pendulum, developed by the Dutch scientist Christian Huygens in the 17th century, changed everything about the mechanics of timekeeping. A pendulum of fixed length always swings in the same amount of time, regardless of the arc it travels, and that principle made it possible to build clocks with a regularity that had never existed before. Daily errors went from minutes to seconds, but even so, precision was a technical luxury without much practical application. There was no system that required all clocks to show the same thing. The turning point came through the railroads. The railway transformed many things in the 19th century, but one of the least celebrated is what it did to time. Before the train, traveling from one city to another was slow. So slow that the time difference between two places did not matter. By the time you arrived, you had already adjusted. But the railroad connected cities at speeds that had previously been unthinkable, and schedules suddenly became a serious matter. A train leaving Bristol at 10 in the morning arrived in London within a few hours, but Bristol and London did not show the same time. Bristol was about 10 minutes behind, because its solar noon occurred 10 minutes later. For travelers, that was an inconvenience. For the railroads, it was a safety problem. Collisions between trains were not uncommon, and many happened because schedules did not align. Two trains moving along the same track in opposite directions had to coordinate their movements with precision. If every station used its own local time, coordination became an unsolvable puzzle. The Great Western Railway in England decided in 1840 to adopt a single time for its entire network, based on the time kept at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. It was not a philosophical declaration. It was an urgent operational decision. One time, one network, no exceptions. Other railway companies followed the same path, each with its own standard time. For decades, train stations in some countries displayed two clocks, one showing local time and one showing railway time. It was a temporary solution that acknowledged the coexistence of two incompatible systems. But the pressure toward standardization was too strong. As networks expanded and countries needed to coordinate trains across borders and regions, the patchwork of local times became unworkable. The next step was the creation of time zones. The idea of dividing the Earth into vertical bands, each assigned an hour in increments of 60 minutes, was proposed by the Canadian engineer Sandford Fleming after he missed a train in Ireland in 1876, or so the story goes, though the anecdote may be more legend than fact. What is certain is that Fleming developed a detailed system and promoted it for years with unusual persistence. His proposal reached the International Meridian Conference, held in Washington in 1884, where representatives from 25 nations agreed to adopt the Greenwich Meridian as the global reference point for longitude and time. The decision was not immediate everywhere. France, with its own meridian in Paris, took decades to fall in line. Some countries adopted time zones offset by half hours or quarter hours to accommodate their geography or political circumstances. But the logic of the system was irresistible. International trade, postal services, telegraph networks, maritime transport, all of it needed a shared temporal framework. The world was accelerating, and time had to accelerate with it. As the 20th century advanced, precision stopped being a virtue and became a technical necessity. Radio communications required synchronization. Aviation needed to coordinate flights across time zones with exactness. And financial markets, operating across continents, had begun to depend on reliable timestamps for transactions to have legal standing. Time was no longer just a cultural reference. It had become infrastructure. Quartz clocks, developed in the 1930s and made widely available in the 70s, brought another leap forward. A quartz crystal vibrates at a constant frequency when an electric current is applied, and that frequency can be used to count time with a regularity that the pendulum could never achieve. Inexpensive quartz watches were more accurate than the finest mechanical luxury timepieces. Precise time stopped being the exclusive domain of observatories and laboratories and moved into the pockets of ordinary people. But the definitive leap came with atomic clocks. A cesium atom, when it absorbs or emits radiation at a specific frequency, does so with a regularity that has no parallel in nature. Atomic clocks developed since the 1950s measure time with such precision that they would take millions of years to drift by a single second. That technology became the foundation of Coordinated Universal Time, known as UTC, the global standard that today synchronizes everything from internet servers to electrical grids. The GPS system that guides cars and phones is, at its core, a time measurement system. Each satellite carries several atomic clocks on board. To calculate a position on Earth, the receiver measures how long it takes for signals to arrive from different satellites and triangulates its location based on those time differences. If the clocks were off by even millionths of a second, the position error could be hundreds of meters. Modern navigation exists because time can be measured with an accuracy that is almost impossible to fully grasp. And yet, there is something strange in all of this. The time your phone shows when the screen turns on is not the time of the sun. It is a construction, a global convention sustained by satellites, international agreements, atomic clocks, and a chain of decisions that began when someone needed two trains not to collide on a track in England. Noon in any given city does not exactly match the moment when the sun is highest in the sky. That was sacrificed in the name of coordination. And the entire world accepted that trade without thinking too much about it. When someone checks the time today, what they see is the visible result of an invisible and enormous infrastructure. They are looking at Greenwich time, adjusted by a time zone, transmitted by satellites orbiting 20,000 kilometers above the Earth, synchronized by protocols that update millions of devices every few seconds. The gesture takes less than a second. The history behind it takes centuries.